Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, I hadn't done a live stream in a while. I hadn't actually even been on YouTube in a while. But after the Electric Money documentary the other day, a lot of people might know that one of my hobbies is I'm kind of a Satoshi enthusiast. It's kind of a hobby of mine, finding out who Satoshi is. Just something I like to do in my spare time. Most people know me as calling the market for Bitcoin and being one of the founders of Chuck and finding small caps and stuff like that. But Satoshi is one of my hobbies. And I'm here with the morning show, and this guy is a super, super good Satoshi researcher. So we linked up online a little bit talking about Satoshi a little while ago. And when the Money Electric documentary came out, we decided that we want to try to do a stream and talk about it a little bit.
Oh, thanks for having me. I share being a Satoshi enthusiast. So again, thanks for inviting me on. Happy to talk.
Yeah, man, he's a super cool guy. And his page is called The Morning Show, but he spells it kind of weird. But on YouTube, he's got a playlist about all the Satoshi suspects, or all the main ones anyway. Super, super good watch if anybody else is into that kind of stuff. So a few things that I like to talk about when you're talking about who is Satoshi. There are so many people that you can make a strong case for. A lot of circumstantial evidence. I mean, there's 10, 15 people that you can make a strong case for. So when I look at it, I try to look at reasons why it couldn't be the person. Not so much why it is, because you can make a strong case for a lot of people. It's why couldn't this person be Satoshi? How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I try to work my way, looking at people and then checking the boxes, yes or no, which if we were doing a real investigation, you'd probably take a million pieces of data and try to hone in on one person. But I like to, basically work the other way around, where I look at people and start seeing, where do they fit, where don't they? Because one, it makes sense to me. And also from an entertainment perspective, I think that's, more exciting. Satoshi is just this incredible story. Like I say it all the time. Imagine if someone who invented the cell phone or the computer was anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
We have this amazing invention with this anonymous person behind it. That's what really hooked me into Bitcoin. That's what keeps me up at night. And, I think there's nothing more interesting. There's nothing more, exciting than Bitcoin. And to have that be this mystery at the beginning, is just a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of the last great mysteries, who is Satoshi. When I knew about Bitcoin in like 2009, it turned me off of it. I thought it was like, the government or something like that, which is still a common theory. I don't think it was the government, but we could talk about that a little later in the stream.
It gets tricky sometimes where, what is the government? It's people,
Yeah.
So people who might be involved in that space could have, very easily been doing stuff on their own as well.
Yeah, and that's a common theory. There's the one guy, gosh, can't think of his name off the top of my head. He was a government guy, and a lot of people, he was a guy who was found dead in a suitcase. A lot of people speculate that he was Satoshi.
Oh, yeah. I think either you shared it with me, but I'm not remembering the name either.
You haven't done a video on him, but yeah, and he's got a decent circumstantial case. I don't think it was him though. A few things, because people is there anything concrete that we do know how you can eliminate somebody? And please correct me if I'm wrong. Like I said, you are more of the expert than I am. I'm more of a hobbyist. I feel like you're a little bit on a higher level than I am. But the day of the Genesis block. So we all know that the London Times headline was in the Genesis block. What a lot of people might not know is that version of the London Times that's in the Genesis block was only for sale in London on that day.
Right. It was the physical copy of the newspaper.
Yeah.
If you look for their internet archive of it, it was a different headline. So the fact that Satoshi used that specific wording means he saw a physical copy somehow.
Yeah, it's presumably he had to be in London because most people would say, especially with the way things are today, we could have got online, blah blah blah. Well, that wasn't the case, and then somebody might say, well, somebody could have sent it to him. You got to imagine this is like 2008. It's not really I'm not saying that's totally out of the question, but I think it's very low probability that that happened. That somebody sent him a picture of the or whatever the headline was in London, and he was somewhere else. So I think that is one piece of evidence that most likely he was in London on the day of the Genesis block.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that, unfortunately or frustratingly, it doesn't make things easier. In fact, it makes things more difficult because a lot of the people we look at, it's like, how are they in London that day,
Yeah.
or why were they?
Couldn't have been in London that day. Yeah,
But
exactly.
but like you said, the chances someone like shared that with them seem unlikely.
Especially in that time frame. At 2008, people weren't just sending pics like that, text like that. It was a different time, a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's crazy to think about. So the day he was launching Bitcoin, he must have been looking for something to put in there. And, you know, I wonder if he was considering other things, a book or a quote, or I think obviously he wanted to timestamp it. So it had to be something produced that day. It's just interesting to think about like what went through his mind. Now it's like such a historic and like this like epic thing to put that newspaper quote in there, but it could have easily been something else. Like if the Times didn't print that, who knows what he could have put in there. I don't know. It's
it was a headline about big banks failing, and he's a little bit of a troll as well. When he put his birthday was the date that the dollar went off the gold standard as well. So there's a little bit of trolls here and there, and I think that the headline kind of falls in line with it. That the big banks fail, Bitcoin is the remedy for this or whatever.
right. And when you like bring this up to normal people, they're like, they look at you like you're crazy. But Satoshi actually did do all these little things to like leave little clues or just make it interesting.
Right.
So I think that's that's awesome.
So, and another piece of evidence, and this makes it even more kind of can eliminate a lot of people. So we say most likely he was in London the day of the Genesis block. Then a week later, when the first Bitcoin transaction was sent to Hal Finney, that came from an IP address that was in Van Nuys, California, which is like Los Angeles, and it was not a Tor endpoint. So I have seen it, like I think some people saying like it could have been fake somehow, but most likely it wasn't. I don't think it was. And there wasn't any blocks mined for a few days after the Genesis block, which would also can kind of confirm in a way that he flew, that he wasn't running the network, that he got on a plane and flew to whatever. So that eliminates a lot of people. It's not only that he had to be in London the day of the Genesis block, but then a week later, you were in California sending a transaction to Hal Finney. And
Yeah,
that's all correct, right?
yeah. I mean, and I would never claim to, I don't have a higher education in computer science. Whether it is possible to like spoof that, or like what would go into, um, you know, uh, putting that out there as like a false flag. But all I can say is that Van Nuys, California point has been out there for, I don't know, 8 years, and I haven't really seen anyone debunk it where, somebody articulated the reasons why that's not accurate. It again, it doesn't prove who Satoshi is, but whoever was using that Satoshi name was in California on that day. So that's another like data point to look at.
Mm-hmm. And another way, this is a big way you can eliminate some suspects. If they were physically documented being somewhere in real life while Satoshi was online troubleshooting an issue, that's a big one.
Right. Right. And that's another way to, if you're really looking to, disprove people, Hal Finney famously was doing a road race when some of Satoshi's writings were taking place. Sergei Nazarov, who
was in,
it's more of a meme candidate, but a lot of his activity was going on while Satoshi was writing.
I think he has got a really strong case, actually. So I was going to talk about him later when we talk about Peter Todd, Sergey Nazarov. But I'll mention that later. But yeah, the Hal Finney, like you said, he was filming a race. I feel like people that don't know, like they're in crypto, they know Satoshi Anonymous, not saying they're like newbies or anything like that. They're kind of default to say it's Hal Finney. And I feel out of all the like main suspects or whatever, Hal Finney is the least likely to.
Yeah, I think, he's obviously important. I think
big time.
he obviously contributed a lot at the beginning. Satoshi probably shared Bitcoin with him before launch. So, Satoshi always gets this credit for like running Bitcoin right away, but he probably knew it was already coming. And that Satoshi probably shared it with them beforehand. But although Hal might not be Satoshi, I don't hate that his name gets linked all the time, because Hal's like the best guy I've like ever encountered. And like, as far as I know, he doesn't have any like skeletons in his closet or like these questionable things about him in his life. So if people want to believe he's Satoshi, that's like the best PR for Bitcoin ever, because he's an awesome guy. Yeah. He had this tragedy.
A person is like an ambassador associated with Bitcoin in like the early days, but I feel good. Like I'm pretty much saying 100% sure Hal Finney is not Satoshi. But I feel like a lot of people in crypto, they aren't as familiar with the finer points of the story. They just kind of default say, "Oh, it's Hal Finney,"
Yeah.
But we talk about some of the other suspects here in a little bit. Just kind of brush over them. And there's one more piece of evidence. I don't think this really proves or disproves anything, but it's like the emails like links back to a Russian proxy, and it was used to review hotel rooms in Vietnam twice by somebody named Sergey. Like that's true, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say, so yeah, there was it seems like Satoshi was using some proxy service, but I think, a lot of people could have been using that service. So
yeah,
it is a point the Sergey Nazarov people point to, but that's a little strenuous. That's like a real schizo theory, But then it's crazy because Sergey was like on this boat on this vacation in I'm forgetting it, but he does seem to have been in the right place at the right time when that proxy was being used.
See, I think he has a really strong. I think he's one of the strongest candidates. Actually, I don't think he's not it. There's things to disprove him, but I actually think his case is really strong. Like,
what points do you like most? Yeah.
Well, he started the smart contract website in like 2007, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no way I can. And I have this brought up. This is a thread that I did on a lot of the candidates, so I got really good feedback on it. And let's see, where is Sergey Nazarov?
Yeah, this is an epic thread. Everyone should read this.
I think, and I'm not sure why I'm not seeing Sergey here, because there he is. So a few things. He registered the main smartcontract.com a week before the Bitcoin white paper was written. I cannot, and now that it forwards you to the Chainlink website. I don't know. I can't think of any reason why that is. Satoshi's last message said he was moving on to other things. And then Sergey started smart contracts. Well, it said in 2014, the smart contracts domain launched a geared site towards Bitcoin smart contracts. People speculate he started Link because he knew that would be needed for the network to evolve. Some people point he slipped up in an interview a little bit. And his personality matches. The second Bitcoin forum started was in Russian. His initials match. One of the theories is that his initials were either SN or NS based off of some communication that Satoshi had said. And then the Russian proxy we were talking about, it was used twice to review hotels in Vietnam by somebody named Sergey, and wasn't active in Bitcoin until 2011 after Satoshi left. But why did he buy the smart contract domain 3 years earlier? So I'm actually somebody who thinks that his case is pretty strong. Now, He most likely couldn't have been in London the day of the Genesis block. And he was posting. He was at an event, and it's documented on Twitter the same time Satoshi was troubleshooting an issue. So I don't think it's Sergey Nazarov, but I personally think he has one of the stronger cases. And the reason I was going to bring him up, jumping ahead a little bit, people know that the Money Electric documentary we're about to talk about, they said it was Peter Todd, and I thought the Peter Todd points, I thought it was a similar case to Sergey Nazarov. I think it's pretty strong. We're not going to talk about it just yet, but that's the reason why I was going to talk about Sergey.
Yeah, I mean, I think whoever Satoshi is, they're definitely, it gets thrown around a lot, this phrase, but like neuroatypical. I think to have $1 trillion and not do anything with it, you got to be, you got to be on this other level of like what's important in your life. Yeah. And I think Sergey falls into that category, right? I mean, famously, he like Doug, he has all the same shirts, he has all the same shoes, multiple pairs. He's focused on his work, and all this like, putting on airs, buying an island, buying fancy cars is just not interesting to him. And I think, the work Satoshi did is in that same category.
Yeah, I think he's got a strong case, but it's fun. That's why this is fun. It's so much fun to speculate on these people and try to prove or disprove. But talking about the documentary, get into it a little bit. What'd you think of it?
I liked it a lot. I felt like on Twitter, everybody was hating on it. I liked it a lot. I think as a movie, I tried to watch it like, what if I didn't know anything about Bitcoin and I wasn't like really into it? And I think he did a good job of having an entertaining movie that covered Bitcoin, maybe not perfectly, but in a really, I think, fair way. I think whenever he brought up a controversial topic, he like hit on both sides. And, overall, I think he did a good job. I may not, we'll get to the Peter Todd thing. I may not agree with that necessarily, but as a movie, I think it's really good. And we don't have many Bitcoin movies, so I think we should cheerlead that as much as possible.
Yeah. So one thing that I'll tell people who haven't watched it yet, if you have a family member, say your wife's not into Bitcoin or just anybody like that, if you get them to sit down and watch it with you, they'll probably be engaged in it. I was watching it with my aunt, who's like 65, I think, and she was into it. She was watching it. She was definitely into it. They do a really good job of like kind of breaking it down for the masses a little bit, and explaining it and breaking it down, just Bitcoin, why it's the third. I really like the beginning when they're going through, CNBC and all these places, Bitcoin is dead, Bitcoin is a fraud, and going like the price and the years and stuff like that. I really like the beginning of it. But yeah, I feel the same way. I think it was good. It was well done.
And think about it. I mean, I don't think that guy's like big into crypto or Bitcoin. So if he started from scratch, like put that movie together, going all the way back to the beginning to now, you have to cover a lot of stuff, I imagine. So to pick and choose what to include and what not to, I'm giving him kudos.
Yeah. And, because I heard it was, so I thought it was going to be about primarily like who Satoshi was. And it's not. Like, even like an hour or more into it, I was like, I thought it was about like who Satoshi was. They hadn't even like said anything. They don't talk about that till the end. So if anybody hadn't seen it, it's just a really good documentary about Bitcoin in general. And then towards the end, they talk about, speculate on somebody who Satoshi might be. But if you got a family member or wife or kids or something like that, it's good to watch it with them. If you want them to understand a little bit about Bitcoin.
You bringing up how it was marketing is kind of interesting, because there was this big betting market on who the movie would out as Satoshi, and it wasn't Peter Todd like at the top of the betting market. So that's just real interesting to me. I wonder if HBO insiders like leaked wrong information or something. Like, it's just usually Vegas or the bettors, when there's money on the line, they get their facts straight. So it's interesting. Poly Market had it wrong, all the way up to the premiere. Right?
So I'd heard of Peter Todd, but I never heard of him mentioned as a Satoshi suspect. Never.
No, and I think we both dig into this just because it's interesting to us, and we're contrarians and all that. And I don't think Peter Todd made the top of any of those lists when you go into Google and search that. So
here's a few suspects. So when I did this thread, first, people seen this picture. This guy's name in real life was Satoshi Nakamoto, Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. He's not the person who founded Bitcoin. However, what is strange is that he lived a few blocks away from Hal Finney, which is, I don't know. For some reason, I just don't think that's a coincidence. Somebody with such a rare name. Hal Finney, we talked about him. How a lot of people do think it's Hal Finney, but I think if there's one person out of the usual suspects you can eliminate, that it's Hal Finney. Adam Back, who was in the documentary a lot as well, he's become more of a popular candidate, I think, in more recent years, and he's got a pretty strong case. And I don't think it's Adam Back. He's got a pretty strong case, and his against aren't as strong as some of the other people's. And I'll tell you, we'll come back to this, towards the end of the stream after we talk about the documentary a little bit more and Peter Todd.
Just before you go past Adam Back, what did you think of Samson Mao in the movie?
Say again.
What did you think of Samson Mao being included in that HBO movie, and what did you think of his pieces?
I thought he was good for the documentary. I mean, I thought it came across well on screen through the documentary, like the things that he said and stuff like that. I don't have a strong opinion to his how credible or whatever and stuff, but he was a good person to throw up there to fill that role, I guess, if that makes sense. What do you think?
I hate him. I don't know why. I just look at him and I get this visceral reaction. I don't know. He loves, in my opinion, I've never met him. Maybe, I would enjoy him if I actually shook his hand and everything, but he loves attention, and he loves, I think, promoting Adam Back as Satoshi because it benefits him and his company, Blockstream. I think Samson likes that people think Adam is Satoshi. It makes them, think Blockstream is this like bigger company than it really is. And, there's like a picture of him out there holding this like Transformer Lego set thing. And he's like doing the like exaggerated smile. I don't know. It just bugs me. So I just had to get that in there. It's not really related to the Satoshi hunt, but
yeah,
Samson Mao was so heavily featured in that movie, and I just imagined him like weaseling his way in, and like he's the one that would respond to every email and like invite the production company to like follow him around because he loves it.
Yeah, I can see that. I see what you're saying. I was going to say something about the documentary. I don't remember what it was now. But gosh, I wish I remember what it was. It was something about, they talk about this is a lot of people that maybe got in the market in 2021 or 2019 aren't as familiar with it. Like in 2017, there was kind of like a big civil war within Bitcoin of people who feel like it's more of a peer-to-peer cash system, or I guess you can say the other side is more of a store of value. But they talk about that a lot, and the two different factions. So a lot of people don't know BCH. Like there's people out there that consider that the real Bitcoin. There's also people who consider BSV the real Bitcoin. And if you see anyone says that they're so delusional. Like if you want to see a delusional community, check out BSV tweets and stuff like that. But I do understand the case there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, big picture, I'm a Bitcoin guy. I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I think BCH is as ridiculous as BSV.
I don't think it's as ridiculous. I'll say that.
But I'd say to focus on the movie, I think he did very good job covering that subject. It was
Right.
probably covered for like 8
explaining
minutes,
Yeah.
and I think it easily could have derailed a movie because there's so much info on both sides and so much to like dig through. I think he did a really good job of, putting it all together into this little segment to hit on, what was going on in Bitcoin history, who was involved, and just showing that, there was a movement of kind of big companies, Roger Ver, trying to take Bitcoin in one direction, and the small blockers, Adam Back, Greg Maxwell, wanted to go in another direction. So I think the movie handled that well, but I'm very anti BCH, very anti BSV.
And there's a like you can go down that rabbit hole just in itself. There's books written about it, and you can really go down the rabbit hole on what happened in 2017 a lot. Some people say it's when the network was hijacked. It's one of those things you can research and come up to your own conclusions with. But when it came to Peter Todd, so he's featured throughout the whole documentary, but they don't really talk about him as being Satoshi till close to the end. I personally felt they made a pretty strong case for him. Now, like with all these other people, that's why I was saying I thought the case they made for him was similar to like is in strength of like Sergei Nazarov, or maybe not quite as strong. But it's more about why it's not, like I said in the beginning of the stream, because there's a lot of people you can make strong circumstantial cases with, and we'll talk about some of those, just for fun. So I actually did think they made a pretty strong case from him. And with me looking around to try to disprove some of the points, so this guy he made a pretty good thread on some of it. So some of the points on why they said it was Peter Todd. One is like the way he acts. He's kind of I don't know the exact word. He's real coy about things, and it's like if you were Satoshi and you had all this Bitcoin, and it's just kind of like this is how somebody like that would kind of act. There was a post where they feel like Peter Todd had just made an account for himself, and then when he started to be on these forums, and that he was logged on as Satoshi, and the theory was he forgot to log off, or he forgot he was logged in as Peter Todd and followed up to something that Satoshi had said, and they displayed this. But then it seems like after the fact, looking at it, they kind of misrepresented that it wasn't like he said it immediately after the Satoshi thing. It's a little strange, I'll give it that, but I don't think it was a smoking gun. Another thing, he made a comment that he destroyed a lot of Bitcoin. And I think that was out of context. Yeah, here, and that was out of context too. That's not what he meant. And then he replaced by a fee proposal, and they had a theory that he was talking to this fake account that he made, and that he had done that to do this replaced by fee proposal. So I'll let you talk about some of those points and some of your thoughts on Peter Todd and everything.
No, I think you covered that pretty well. The movie did a little bit of editing, like you said, where it shows Satoshi's post and then cuts it at a certain point to make it look like Peter's thought is really kind of finishing his sentence.
And it was 13 hours later.
It was this bigger post.
Yeah.
And, the movie kind of edited that a little bit. But I don't know. I don't think it's completely out of line. I agree that just look at the picture. Can you go to the picture of Peter Todd? That his face at the top. He has this look on him it's like he is coy. He is kind of odd. He is kind of a personality that I think could be, able to go on with life and live after getting rid of $1 trillion. I do think he is kind of an interesting guy in that way. And what you said last, that Peter Todd was interacting with a guy named John Dillon by email. Something's weird going on there. I don't necessarily think it means he's Satoshi, but something very odd was going on.
and it's kind of like the Sergey Nazarov smart contract thing. Like, I don't have an explanation for it. Like smart contract website domain, I don't have an explanation for it because the whole, like you're talking about the communications, because the emails ended up getting leaked, and it does seem like he made the account and was talking to himself.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Life is strange. There's a million mysteries I think related to Bitcoin. You know, aside from the Satoshi one, and it's just another piece. I think the movie hit on it a little, that government agencies were probably trying to get involved in Bitcoin and get intertwined. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I think they do that with a lot of projects, right? So I think they would do that with Bitcoin as well. So you have to be a little, suspicious or look at things in that context whenever there's weirdness going on, whenever there's people trying to make changes to a project like Bitcoin. So I think um, we may not get the answers till it's like released in a Freedom of Information Act request like 50 years from now. But I bet a lot of those people posting on the early Bitcoin talk message boards were, clicked up with intelligence agencies.
Yeah, probably so. Because that was the thing. This John Dillon guy was supposed to be with some government agency, but just seemed kind of weird. And yeah, but another way, because Peter Todd, I think at this time he was connected with other people that were in bit like Adam Back and these people. I think at the time of this, I think he knew them. So even if he was talking to himself, maybe it was still a way to introduce the replace by fee idea, and it doesn't necessarily have to link back to Satoshi. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And it would, yeah, it would hurt me as a Bitcoin maximalist, a small blocker, if it turns out to be true that the government did implement that to try and hurt Bitcoin. But I
Well,
still think that would be a right decision to make, even
what I'm
if
saying, what I'm
it had
saying is
bad
that
intentions.
he did it himself. He was talking to himself, but it was to try to implement that on behalf of the people who like on Blockstream to still implement the idea, but it doesn't necessarily mean it links back to Satoshi.
Right, right. Yep. It just means he's he's a weird guy.
Yeah, that made an account talking to himself, maybe. But I don't know. But to your point, you're saying like it could have been the government, and it was in a way to kind of hurt and make it not what it was intended to be, and kind of hurt the network a little bit.
Right. I mean, you know, this is more Bitcoin discussion than Satoshi, but yeah, that was where the schism was going. Where do we try to allow for more transactions and sacrifice, you know, uh, centralization,
Mm-hmm.
or do we be conservative, keep the block small, and it's going to hurt adoption, basically. And maybe the government did get involved and like put their thumb on one side, trying to hurt Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Um,
I would think
it's
the government
entirely
would
possible.
be on the small block side. I think they would not want it to be peer-to-peer cash so much.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think Bitcoin ultimately has shown to be resilient, and that small block path, has kept it safe and secure and decentralized. So if they were trying to kill it, they were wrong, but it doesn't mean that couldn't have been their intention.
I don't think if the government favored the small block side that it wasn't to kill it, but that it wouldn't be so much as like day-to-day use for cash, for like a peer-to-peer cash system back and forth.
Right. Well, they should feel dumb still, because digital gold is still going to flip traditional systems, even if it's not digital cash. Like, you know, uh, or it's not able to be used as easy as a credit card. Digital gold is still going to, crush all these traditional systems. So
Yeah.
that's my viewpoint.
So we talk about like, there's a lot of people with circumstantial cases. It's more about why they can't be. So when we look at, and now I had a ton of time to look at it, Maybe you have, but I was trying to look, okay, why isn't it Peter Todd? And then I tell you what I mostly saw on Twitter and just people talking about it in threads that is not Peter Todd. Trust me, bro. I saw a whole lot of that of just people saying it's not Peter Todd. There's no way it's Peter Todd without saying it's not Peter Todd because. And one thing people would say was like his views, no way, no how would line up with Satoshi. He's pro-war. He's a Zionist. Um, Maybe that's true, but if people don't know Satoshi personally, if it was, I'm just speculating. Like, say it was Peter Todd, and he did it when he was younger. You know, this is 16 years later. He could have changed his political views if that was the case. You know, and looking at just general info about Peter Todd online, I just couldn't really find a lot of just general info because a lot of things that can disprove him is the early days of Bitcoin. Say, like, you know, when the network first came online, could he have been in London? Could he have been in Van Nuys? Or when there was a network issue, was he somewhere else? That info was hard for me to like even come close to anything to find about him. There just wasn't like he didn't even have a Wikipedia page. So I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I agree that all the initial reaction were people taking this like moral stance, like, you know, uh, like you said, not actually dropping info, just saying like this movie is bad because it
Yeah.
did this, which
And
is
it's
like,
not Peter Todd. Trust me, bro.
yeah, it's very low IQ take. But I don't have a lot of Peter Todd knowledge to drop. You know, I think there isn't a lot out there. I plan to get into that, but you know, I think it's worth looking at. But it it um it wouldn't surprise me if I was wrong and Peter Todd is Satoshi. I think he is an odd guy, and I think I more than most put Satoshi on a pedestal, but it's very possible Satoshi is like, you know, has a bunch of screwed up personal beliefs and is like not a good guy and is not someone you would want to hang out with, you know, as much as that um, sucks to say. Um,
Well, also at the time of Bitcoin's creation, Peter Todd was a liberal arts student.
mhm.
So this is almost 20 years later, you know, and he was younger. People changed their political views and stances and
Right.
all these kinds of things. Another thing, Peter Todd, you know, a few other points. He's Canadian, so he uses Commonwealth English. Another thing Satoshi used. Um, what was coding C++, and he lied about it one time, saying he wasn't that kind of C++ coder, and he was. He was a very gifted coder. Like he said, he could code before he could read and write. Really, I thought they made a strong case for him. Now, seeing some of the things after the fact that were misrepresented, I didn't like. Like we talked about, he didn't really finish the Satoshi thought. That was many hours later. Where he said he destroyed a lot of Bitcoin. Now, it's speculated that's not what he was talking about, but he could have been talking about if he was Satoshi and he destroyed the private keys to all that Bitcoin. That could have been what he was talking about. The way he's so coy, like if you were Satoshi, you had this big secret that everyone else didn't know. Like that is how he acts. And I kind of thought Adam Back was acting that way too. Like just the look on his face when the documentary guy was confronting them about it. Like, I don't know. Adam Back wasn't like shrugging it off. He wasn't like his facial expressions and like stuff. It wasn't like dismissive.
Yeah, that's another one of my pet peeves. Adam Back consistently makes this little smile like, "Oh, I'm not Satoshi." Like he'll say the words, "I'm not Satoshi," but his complete body language and behavior is like, you know, making you or he wants to make you think that he is Satoshi. You know, again, I'm not in his head, but you know, he definitely enjoys the fame or that notoriety. So he was smirking it up this whole movie as he always does in interviews, saying it's actually not important who Satoshi is. You know, and then he I don't think he is Satoshi, but I think he wishes he was.
Yeah, probably. And maybe he wasn't being so dismissive when they were talking. He was confronting about Peter Todd because he was jealous because he's like, I want you to say I'm Satoshi, not Peter Todd. But I
Yeah.
really did think they made a pretty strong case for Peter Todd, and the fact that you're not going to disprove it off of off Google searches on the surface level. You're going to have to, like, some investigative journalist or somebody's going to have to look into it further, about, because the best way to disprove it is where he was in those early days. Those are the best ways to disprove it. Could he have been in London? Could he have been in Van Nuys? Was he somewhere else while Satoshi was online troubleshooting something? Those are the kinds of things that that'll disprove somebody.
Right.
I like
So if any Satoshi hunters are out there, was Peter Todd in London at the start of Bitcoin?
Mhm.
I think there's definitely connections to California. So that London piece, it could blow this wide open. I imagine the guy who made this movie, I'm forgetting his name, he probably looked into that and probably maybe didn't find anything. If he wanted to end his movie on that, I'm sure he did a lot of digging. What else can I, link Peter Todd, Satoshi? So I'm a little nervous that there wasn't more in there, because this guy had a lot of resources. He dropped a lot of money on this movie. He bought a Bitcoin miner for like a 2-second scene to like show plugging in a miner, unless he rented it. But point being, he put a lot of resources into this movie.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know what we're talking about with the Genesis block and the Van Nuys IP address. It's not common knowledge, I would say, for people to know. And if he would have found things to disprove it, then he already kind of gone that route with Peter Todd, then he definitely wouldn't divulge it. But it's possible he doesn't know those things. He said in the movie when he got into Bitcoin, he's not like somebody been in Bitcoin for many, many, many years or anything like that. But I would like to see more people. Some of, like, this guy's thread here that I was talking about, like, he likely he doesn't disprove it necessarily. He just says that some of it's misrepresented, that it's not like we're talking about the post, that it was 13 hours later, that they made it seem like it was right after, that him saying he destroyed a lot of Bitcoin, that's maybe out of context as well. But there's nothing that I've seen yet that is like, okay, this is why it can't be him. Like with some of these other suspects that we can talk about in a minute, because I think a few people do want to hear about other Satoshi suspects and what we think about them and stuff. But do you have anything else to add about Peter Todd or the documentary?
Well, there's that one point where, everybody has a date where Satoshi stopped communicating, but there's that email in 2014 that came from Satoshi's email, the Vistomail email account, kind of weighing in on the block size stuff. And basically backing up kind of the replaced by fee, what Peter Todd would have been saying,
that
is
was
in that email. So again, that Satoshi email might be completely bunk. Like,
right. I feel it's not widely regarded as fact.
Right.
Like it may be, may not. I think is the kind of the sentiment and
But I mean, it's something to point to. Can we debunk it one way or the other? But it would imply Satoshi is not dead, and it would imply Satoshi may think similar to Peter Todd. So interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'd forgotten about that one. And like you said, the Satoshi email in 2014, it may be Satoshi, may not. But when it comes to the story of Satoshi the Mystery, you got to take what's out there. There's not a whole lot of threads to hang on to. So the threads that are out there, you have to look at them.
Yeah, that's why anytime there's a Satoshi drop, like one new message or one new email comes out, it's like exciting.
Mm-hmm.
An email came out where he's, he used the word retarded. That was like, whoa. It was like Satoshi actually like said something like besides technical troubleshooting. It's always interesting to see that.
Yeah. So talking about some of the other candidates, Adam Back's become somebody who's very popular candidate over the last couple of years, and I do think that he's a top 5 candidate. I do think he has a strong case. He made a Hashcash, a Bitcoin predecessor. He worked at Microsoft and used Windows, which Satoshi used Windows for this, which some people think is odd. They thought, like, at that time, especially, that somebody would have used Linux for this. He also was one of the only maiden candidates that double spaces after a period. And in the white paper that is done, uses double spacing after a period. He didn't show up on Bitcoin forums, so after Satoshi was gone. He, like, motive-wise, like a lot of people say, like, whoever Satoshi was had to have a motive, and Adam Back's kind of have a history of fighting the system. And he writes in Commonwealth English, and likely would have been in London the day of the Genesis block, and was relatively free during these times. So it's not out of the question that he would have flown to LA. I just don't know why he would have. But these are some decent points for some of his Satoshi's first. I think the first emails were to Adam Back, which finally got released during the Craig Wright trial. So then some of the early emails to We Die asked questions that Adam Back wouldn't have asked. A lot of OGs were skeptical about it in the beginning, and how some of the things that Adam Back said were kind of in line with what other people that were OGs in the space, their complaints about Bitcoin, of what Adam Back had said in the early days, which is highlighted right here. But he's still involved with Bitcoin, to this day. He's very and then a lot of people said he would have cited Nick Szabo's Bit Gold as a reference, and it is not cited in there. You got anything else to add about Adam Back morning show?
I think the citation stuff, is important. He asked Wei Dai in like a personal email, like how to cite one of his papers when he's cited Wei Dai before. So it would be I don't know. It's possible he did that as a, distraction, but it's weird you would like personally email somebody something you already know in hopes that it's leaked and it would point away from you as Satoshi. And
especially at that time, like
right.
To throw somebody off the trail in that way, I think that's a little too much conspiracy.
And that's why a lot of people think it was a younger person, somebody not a super expert in the history of electronic money, the way Adam Back is, leaving out Szabo and, just some of the choices that he made, both in programming and, the way it was presented to the world. Adam, is like a graybeard OG that like would be able to spout off all this history when Satoshi seemed not. So
a lot of people say that Satoshi, it seemed like he knew how to code, but didn't work in the industry or hadn't in many years and didn't know a lot of the norms, which is another point for Peter Todd, and a point against some of these other like cyberpunk OGs that some people put as main suspects. Like Nick Szabo here, I think that he has more points than anybody else to be Satoshi. I don't think he is Satoshi, but I think that he has the most points. Just he's an OG in the space. He created BitGold, it's a similar proof of work concept. He has a lot of interest and motivation. He made quotes going back to the 90s about these kinds of things. He wrote a blog for years. It significantly slowed down in the early days of Bitcoin. Proof of work article in 2015 that sounds similar, and then later he changed the date on it. Now, this was actually addressed in the documentary, this point right here, that he actually had a reason for doing that. There's never any emails between him and Satoshi. So some people are saying he didn't email himself. BitGold was not mentioned in the white paper, so it's like he didn't reference himself. Was likely in California the day of the first transaction was sent to Hal Finney. It was very likely that he would have been in California at that time. Writing analysts say of the main suspects that he uses a lot of the phrasing in his own writing. Some emails suggest that Satoshi's emails are NS or SN. There's a strange video blog post he did a month after the Genesis block, and some say he was dropping an Easter egg about solving the double spending problem. If you see that video, I mean, it is weird. He would just post that weird video out of nowhere. And some people feel he slipped up in an interview as well. So you can see there's quite a few points for Nick Szabo. You got anything to add?
What'd you have for the against for Nick?
Yeah, we'll go over that for sure. So Satoshi didn't know about certain projects and wasn't familiar with a lot of programming norms. Similar like back that questions that Nick Szabo wouldn't have asked. He's not known for C++ language. Doesn't write in Commonwealth English. Satoshi said Bitcoin is bloody hard to explain. Most likely Szabo wouldn't have said that. Friends with Satoshi say Satoshi's emails simply don't sound like Szabo. Like personality doesn't really match. Didn't start blogging much again after Satoshi left, so it wasn't like his blog stopped and then came back later. And maybe wanted to see Bitcoin's faults before launching BitGold, and maybe that's why BitGold didn't ever launch, because he thought Bitcoin would fail and he would use some of those points to help out. He's unlikely to be in London the day of the Genesis block. Why would he not have moved the wallet? That's something else you have to think about some of these Satoshi candidates. Why wouldn't they move some of the Bitcoin? And given Satoshi has some unfamiliar aspects of the space, it's possible he just wasn't familiar with Szabo's work.
To me, Nick is Satoshi.
Really?
I think, in Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire, when people would talk about, the books, and they wouldn't want to spoil the book to new people, they had a theory that was R plus L equals J, which would talk about Jon Snow's parents, because that's a big reveal in that book series. So they didn't want to talk about that theory out in the open. They would just say R plus L equals J to talk about that theory. I think Bitcoin should just use SN equals NS and, point to that as a way to talk about Satoshi being Nick without blowing it open for all the newbies. I do think
you haven't always thought this, though. You must have come to this conclusion at some, like when you made a video about Szabo, I don't think you thought it was him.
Well, I wasn't 100%, but I was pretty strong. At the end of the video, I say, I can't say Nick is Satoshi, as in, I really, I can't really go out and say that. But I was also holding a book. I picked a very specific book. It was O.J. Simpson's book, If I Did It, talking about the murders of, his wife, so not to go off on a tangent, but O.J. Simpson wrote this messed up book called If I Did It, where he wrote, like, if he killed his wife, this is how it would have went down, So I was trying to signal a little bit about Nick when I did that. And, Nick in the 90s was writing about putting on, pseudonyms, saying how, whenever he makes a pseudonym, he has to constantly think about all these little details, how to avoid linking it to his real identity. And so, he definitely had the skill set to be Satoshi. Again, I can't prove it. I'm just one guy,
What percent would you say you think it's Nick Szabo?
99.
Really? That surprises me. I don't think it's Nick Szabo.
No, that's fine. But, and it's even hard for me to kind of articulate everything, but it's just everything I've waded through and seen and experienced. I can't get past him. And, it's another one where, Nick has some questionable, things in maybe his personal life where we don't really want to tout him as the creator of Bitcoin. It probably would hurt the brand. But, to me, I haven't been able to really move past him. And, I've dropped it, kind of a little in a couple of my videos. I did this like sit down where I was like in a little coffee shop answering questions. I brought it up there. I don't go off the rooftop shouting that. But to me, Nick is Satoshi.
Yeah, and like I said, I think he has the most points pointing towards him being Satoshi. And even the against, there's not like a hard like can't be because of this, not known for C plus language. That's one, doesn't write in Commonwealth English. There's some things here. Could he been in London the day of the Genesis block? You know, there is some the points against aren't like extremely damaging, like somebody we're going to talk about in a minute, as well as we talked about Sergei Nazarov. We can touch on him again, but like he has a pretty strong case in some regards, but he was somewhere else when Satoshi was troubleshooting a network issue. So there you go. It's not him. There's nothing like that with Szabo, and he does have the most points, in my opinion. He's got the most points in favor of. So I think I even said in the post that I don't think you're crazy. Although I think there's more points for Szabo than anyone else, I think it's more about points against. And when I look at it, I personally don't think you're crazy. If you think it's if you think that it is him, like I say that in the post, like I don't think you're crazy if you think it's Szabo. I just think some of the points against kind of disprove him. But even like I said, even the points against aren't like hard line. There you go, can't be him.
And big picture, I think Satoshi, whoever it is, did enough to obscure their identity that all these people we're going to bring up, we can't hone down 100%. And it's credit to Satoshi, and it's real protection, right? I mean, so regardless of what we say, Satoshi did a good enough job of obscuring themselves, it seems, to prevent them from being outed.
Right. So the next person, I have Elon Musk in here. I don't think most people consider Elon Musk a serious candidate, but there is quite a bit on Elon Musk. C++, use Windows. He also was renting a mansion in Van Nuys, California at the time that he ended up buying later. When the transaction was sent to Hal Finney, co-founder of PayPal. So he said the goal was to create a decentralized currency in 2005. There is some things. Made a quote using Bitcoin mining for energy. There is some things here that definitely like points for, but it's kind of like we talked about. You can make strong circumstantial case for a lot of people. It was not Elon Musk. I think no one seriously thinks it was Elon Musk, but they just kind of show one reason I added this is one reason to show you that you can make a strong circumstantial case for people. And the main reason it's not him is like he in October 2008 became the CEO of Tesla before the white paper. There's no way he would have the time to dedicate to that as long with SpaceX, and that he would have used some of the Bitcoin for some of his other endeavors. He wouldn't have not moved the wallet.
I'm all for these obscure candidates, though. To imagine somebody like rearranging the letters of his kids' names to like try to find the secret message is like awesome to me.
Right. That's another one of the things. And I write that you can look at that a little more when it comes to Elon Musk, but supposedly it's some way he named his kid and you can decipher it and it says Satoshi Nakamoto or something like that. Now, Lynn Sassaman, I don't know why it keeps doing that. Now, Lynn Sassaman is somebody who I think over time, he's kind of become a very popular candidate. I think on the poly market, he was the number one candidate for the documentary. Now, I think if Szabo has the most points, that Sassaman may have the strongest points. He has some really strong points. So he knew Hal Finney, Adam Back, and these other people that received early emails. He studied under David Chum, who was considered the godfather of the space. He was an academic. Most people think that it's possible. Satoshi was an academic for a few reasons. He spent time in Europe and California, used Commonwealth English as well as spellings like Satoshi. He had the motivation, and he was trying to figure out the Byzantine general's problem. He has other anonymous handles online, the time of day Satoshi was posting, and Lynn Sassaman's tweets are almost exactly the same. Like he was online the same time as Satoshi. He's regarded as like being extremely smart. People say he's a really smart guy. And then, unfortunately, he took his own life in 2011, just months after Satoshi's last emails. So that is some strong points right there. There's no doubt about it that there's some strong points for Sassaman. But in the early days of Bitcoin, his schedule was extremely busy. And he was traveling a lot. It's hard to see how he could have done both, maintained his schedule and been on the network like Satoshi was. which, like we said, that's one of the ways you can disprove somebody. Likely would have used the Bitcoin in Satoshi's wallet or left it to his wife or donated. He was a little bit of a political activist. So I don't know that he could have left it to his wife and she lost it or something. I don't know. But even in 2011, when he committed suicide, Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is worth quite a bit then, as much as he had in the wallet. So just thinks that he would have probably moved some of it for his family. But here's the big thing. He made extremely, extremely negative tweets about Bitcoin. Now, throwing people off is one thing, but he tweeted very negatively about Bitcoin. His personality doesn't really fit what we know of Satoshi, and there's been 2 postings potentially with Satoshi since he went dark. And if that was the case, then Sassaman couldn't have done it. So kind of like with Szabo, there's a lot of reasons to like him. I don't think you're crazy if you think it's Sassaman, but I personally do not think that it is Sassaman. So what are your thoughts on Sassaman?
Yeah, that was pretty comprehensive. I think the stuff about Meredith Patterson, his partner, his wife, is some of the most compelling stuff against him being Satoshi. It seemed like a lot of his professional work and obviously, his personal life was with her. He collaborated with her, and for her not to be involved at any point, especially towards the end, seems, strains my brain to see how he could live a life like that. She's active on Twitter, I think more so since the Len documentary, not the Len doc, since the HBO documentary, and since like articles have been written about Len. And at a couple points, she's like asking for money, like for donations. Like, I don't think she's doing, God bless her, and everything there. But I think, Len didn't leave her much. So, if Len was Satoshi, you would have thought some of those early mined coins would have went her way.
Yeah,
and it doesn't appear they did.
And that's another thing to disprove Hal Finney too. That like he needed money for his treatment at the end of his life, and he would have used some of it or whatever. He was interviewed basically on his deathbed, and he was like, "I'm not Satoshi. I don't know who it is."
Right, and I think he did sell coins, at the beginning, and it was probably worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe not millions or billions. So I think that shows he did what he could with what he had.
And yes, I still like MCADE for a gaming project for this bull market.
They're making a Bitcoin video game. I think it's called. There's a guy on Twitter. It's like NES graphics. I think it's called The Hero of Bitcoin. If you want to look it up later.
I'll definitely check that out. Use Bitcoin within the game.
I think it's more Bitcoin themed than actually incorporating Bitcoin as like a payment. I don't know. Actually, he might be accepting it as payment. But Bitcoin,
I'd rather be Bitcoin themed, and then they have some kind of shit coin, and then we'll just buy the shit coin and make money, and then buy Bitcoin with the money from the shit coin.
You can't be so jaded.
So Sergey Nazarov, we talked about him earlier in the stream, but if you weren't tuned in, then I think Sergey Nazarov has a pretty strong case personally. I don't think it's Sergey Nazarov, but he registered the domain smartcontract.com a week before the Bitcoin white paper was written, which is something that's just really hard to explain. Satoshi said he's moving on to other things. In 2014, the smart contract domain launched a site geared towards Bitcoin smart contracts. People speculate Link, was like the next step in the evolution of what Bitcoin would need. That needed some kind of oracle. People say he slipped up in an interview where he corrects how long he's been in blockchain spaces, and it just seems kind of odd. Personality matches. Second Bitcoin forum was started that was in Russian, which is his native language. His initials match for those that, some people say it could be NS or SN based on some communication from Satoshi. And also the Russian proxy address we talked about earlier, that there was a Russian proxy, like there was a link to Satoshi's email, and it was used to review hotels in Vietnam by somebody named Sergey. The morning show pointed out that Sergey was actually in that part of the world at that time as well. And wasn't active in Bitcoin until 2011 after Satoshi left. So why did he buy the domain for smart contracts 3 years earlier if he wasn't even active? It just seems strange. Now, he would have been really young. He would have been 19 at the time of the white paper, which isn't impossible. But given the years leading up to it as well, it would have been a tall task. Most likely wasn't in London the day of the Genesis block or in LA, Van Nuys, the day of the Hal Finney transaction. He's supposed to be in New York at this time and was posted at an event on Twitter the same time Satoshi was troubleshooting an issue, which is like the big one that why it most likely is not him. But I think he makes a pretty strong case. I don't think he gets enough. Like, you kind of consider him more of a fringe candidate, right?
Well, I guess that's maybe not fair. I think I said meme candidate because that whole Chainlink community is like very bizarre, very strange people, very strong advocates for Chainlink. And I think they go to great lengths to promote Chainlink and promote Sergey. So I think sometimes the Satoshi stuff gets mixed in with like these, schizophrenic people who want Chainlink to do well. So they point to Satoshi. I mean, they point to Sergey as being this 4D chess playing mastermind.
The Link Marines, that's what they call themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you hold a big cap altcoin from one cycle to the next, normally the community, like ADA community, is kind of like that. They just kind of unhinged or whatever. And I think Link is kind of like that too, like you're referencing. So the
and ADA also has a charismatic or an odd guy at the helm that people point to being a 4D chess mastermind.
Yeah, now he's a smart guy for sure. I don't. There's definitely no doubt about that Sergey Nazarov's a smart guy. A lot of people say NSA, and there's reasons to think that the government, for running that so much investigation, is still anonymous. Quite a feat for an ordinary citizen. Bitcoin is ultimately an open ledger, and there's no anonymity. It can be used against you as a data collection tool, which is what you're seeing with CBDCs. SHA-256 was created by the NSA. A BuzzFeed reporter submitted a Freedom of Information Act, and he didn't get much back. 900 pages from the IRS, and most of it was redacted. Started 10 months into Obama's administration, which would make sense. Such a program would start at that time in an administration, like a new administration, and within the first year. And then having Satoshi Bitcoin maintains you can always have control over the network as it grows. So there is a few reasons, but there's a lot of reasons against too. So a lot of people know more than I do about this. Just say the initial rollout just doesn't seem like it was government done. Like, it just doesn't seem like that's how they would have done it. Why would an imaginary government figure feel the need to disappear? The government, this person, if they were a government figure, they probably would have stayed around if they ever disappeared at all. Why would the NSA post these little like Easter eggs in like the Genesis block and the Satoshi's birthday? I don't know. Maybe just doesn't really seem like their style. SHA-256 has been open source for a long time, and nobody's found a back door. It's unlikely the government would have used Windows at that time. Satoshi's message about WikiLeaks seems emotional, not like a government response. Like when he's talking about the WikiLeaks thing, like he was upset. And that's when he disappeared shortly thereafter. It just wouldn't make sense that if it was implemented under Obama, that the current Democrats would oppose it so bad. Obama himself. Like, if it was released under his administration, you would think that he wouldn't be against it. So what are your thoughts on government?
Yeah, I mean, it is weird to think about. Yeah, Obama was like the Bitcoin president for like all these crazy things that happened in the early days of Bitcoin. But I guess it was so small, it wasn't, at least going all the way up the chain to him to really comment on. Big picture, we should always think of the government. I think Tor is a great parallel, the Onion Router, a government project funded, by the military. The military is still very involved in it, but it's an open source project that, people all around the world use. And, I think backdoors are always a thing, but it seems that, leaders of cryptography still put a lot of faith in Tor and use it. So it is possible for a government to make something that they don't necessarily have complete control over, because they want to use it in some form or fashion. But like you pointed out in the cons, whoever was running the Satoshi handle was like one voice. It
Yeah.
seemed to be a person,
Yeah.
which wouldn't fly with kind of the bureaucracy involved in that, and all these little personal decisions made. So, I don't think it's crazy to ever bring that up, but if you're talking about Satoshi, releasing Bitcoin, it does seem to be like just a regular human, not some giant organization.
Yeah. And I say government, I mean, top 10 candidate for sure, but maybe maybe top five, maybe 5 or 6. I don't discount it completely, but I think it's unlikely. I think that when you break down some of these points against, now there's not like a hard line like, oh, well, it can't be the government, because you can't say, oh, well, the government was at this event when Satoshi was troubleshooting the network, or the government couldn't have been in London the day of the Genesis block. You can't disprove it from those points. So, I definitely don't put it out of the question that it could have been the government, but I think it's unlikely.
There's a lot of anonymous handles contributing to Bitcoin every day, and were there right at the beginning. Some of them could have directly worked for the government or have just been, connected in some way, So I think to talk about Bitcoin, you can't ever ignore that. But if we're talking about Satoshi Nakamoto, it's different.
Now, there's a guy named Alexander Muse who says that the NSA does know who it is, though, that they use a program called Prism and Muscular, and they were able to analyze the writing and comparing it with 1 trillion other samples and identified him. So, according to that article, which is linked here, saw my thread if anybody wants to check it out. He says that that he does, that they know who it is.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So some other suspects, we mentioned him a few times. He's a decent suspect. Could have made a post about him. This guy right here is more of a fringe suspect. Have you ever heard of him? I don't know how to say his name. Shinichi Masazuki.
No, I have not.
He's a real popular, like smart mathematician, and some people say there's some links to him and stuff like that. Not a whole lot of info about him, just kind of that he's the kind of guy that would have done this, and he was super smart and whatever. Ross Albright, the creator of Silk Road, there's some things pointing to him, but he made some comments online in 2011 that make it really hard to believe it's him. Another Sergey Cheklo. I'm not sure, but he's the guy who created a few crypto projects. And he started the first proof of stake blockchain under the name BC Next right after Satoshi said he was moving on. There's actually, I could have made a tweet about him. There's a few things resolving this BC Next. I think he's the guy who made IOTA. I don't think it was him, but there's more evidence there than you would think. Then Gavin Andreessen, he's an early Bitcoin dev who Satoshi handed the reins of the network over to, so to say. And I don't think it was him either, but he's a popular name sometimes people bring up as well. Then there's the morning show's favorite, Craig Wright, who we won't even go into that. Craig Wright is definitely not Satoshi, but he made claims that he was, court cases, all this stuff. I think it's possible that Craig Wright has a lot of Bitcoin, a lot of early Bitcoin. He was in the network early, but
he was on, the Cypherpunk mailing list, like interacting right at the beginning, So, I mean, he's not, to call him like a complete phony and fraud, is going too far. But, he's just, he's he's something else where I don't know if it's a personality trait or he has some other goals in mind, but He's tried to make himself bigger than he is, and it has not gone well for him.
He is very unlikable. Then one last guy I cover, Paul LaRue. Now, if you just don't know who this guy is, just look him up. He lived the life of like a James Bond villain. It's really one of the craziest stories, just his life in general. And there's a lot of reasons he has a lot of points for. C++ expert. They said it's either a team of people or a genius. LaRue's a genius. In 1999, he created a software encryption program called E4M, and it was on Microsoft Windows, which we said Satoshi used Windows. He's widely credited with TrueCrypt as well, which uses source code from E4M. In 2002, he posted online a write-up of a concept similar to Bitcoin, wrote in Commonwealth English, very familiar with the banking system. Had a big motivation to do it because he had a lot of payment issues with his online opiate business. Did programming, but didn't work in the industry, which is supposed to be another trait. Personality and emails could match Satoshi. From prison, he said that he knew a way to improve ASIC mining. Had the time to pursue it. He was a criminal, so he didn't have a day job. When LaRue went to jail, the Satoshi Bitcoin was only worth $12 million, which was nothing to him. He had a lot of money, so makes sense why he wouldn't have moved it. And then he had a passport with the name Satoshi on it. And against, when time I looked at this, I said, a lot of people just say it's crazy. Morning Show here, he actually did a video on LaRue after I made this, and he had some pretty good points why it wasn't LaRue. One was that Satoshi was very repetitive in when he posted online. And somebody like LaRue being an international criminal, it probably would not have been that consistent. It just probably been all over the place.
Right. Consistent is the best word.
Yeah.
It seemed that, he slept at the same time, throughout his posting history. So, someone like Paul, like you said, was taking yachts all over the world, working around the clock. Mm-hmm. Satoshi, believe it or not, that's like one of the rare pieces of evidence on who they are is, a couple hours a night, he did seem to go to bed. It doesn't pinpoint whether, he was a night owl or an early riser or what, but, Paul LaRue was wheeling and dealing across the world, like throwing people off boats and waterboarding them and, all this wild stuff that wouldn't have matched up with that.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been, the time wouldn't have been so consistent. That was a good point. And that's why sometimes with these people, it only takes one thing. And one reason why it was harder for me to find points to disprove LaRue was because you just don't know where he was, like in the day of the Genesis block or what he was up to or where he was doing, because he lived this life of an international criminal and people just didn't know where he was or what he was doing. So it's hard to disprove that he was somewhere when Satoshi was online. All these things we talked about on how you would disprove it. It was hard to do that with LaRue because you just didn't know. Not necessarily that, he was Satoshi, but it was just hard to disprove it. Some of the things you can use to disprove other candidates. Is there anybody else that you like that we didn't cover?
I think that little list you did at the end with like the couple of questionable unknown guys is always something to keep in mind. We put so much focus on the big names, people who like use their real name on the internet during the early days of Bitcoin, but there's so many, anonymous handles out there that are probably just as interesting, but we just can't connect them to their real life persona. So like Wei Dai's name always gets dropped, but that's as far as it goes. You mentioned Wei Dai was involved at the beginning. He was collaborating with all of them, but he did such a good job thinking about privacy his whole life. There's just no meat there to really talk about Wei Dai. Even the pictures out there are questionable. We don't even know what the guy looks like. And he's like a real academic who like puts out all this work.
Yeah, he says there's no pictures of him on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, there's some that could be him, but we have no idea. So,
Mhm.
it's just it's a frustrating thing that Satoshi could be some handle on the early cypherpunk mailing list that we've just never talked about. But
That's what I think. I think that Satoshi, who it is, has never been brought up as a candidate. That's my theory. I think that they've never identified, because most of it they're looking at like well-known people in the space, Adam Back, Nick Szabo, Lynn Sassaman, all these people. I think it was just somebody that was just lived a very private life, was into this stuff, that he was a cypherpunk, and just nobody really knew him. Nobody knew his, kind of like what you just said, some of these people that just don't know who they were in real life. That is my theory. I think that the person who it really is has never been brought up as a candidate.
Until we find them.
Yeah, I don't think we ever will. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, it's. I think. Yeah, I said it before. I think he did enough that we can maybe get close, but to 100% confirm, even the NSA, with what they have access to, if somebody methodically made this username, took all these steps, there's enough plausible deniability there. Even if the NSA points to somebody, they could probably say prove it, and like a court would never, get to that point of proving it.
And think about it, like some of these people have been asked in interviews, like Sergey Nazarov, I think Nick Szabo, all these people have been asked about it. If one of them said, "Yeah, I'm Satoshi," people would be like, "No, he's not." Like all of a sudden, like I guarantee you, it would be like all of a sudden, unless you have the private key and you can prove it or something like that, that they would say, no, he's not. All of a sudden, that's how just people's psychology works. So even if the person did come out and say it was, there would be a lot of doubters saying it wasn't them, I feel like.
If I can plug something else, I got invited to this new Reddit community called Who is Satoshi? Looks like it was just created. There's only like 4 posts on it right now, but interesting stuff if you're looking to scratch that itch and dig into some stuff. There could be some interesting things getting posted there in the future. There's a couple things there already. So yeah, Who is Satoshi? The Reddit community.
Cool. We're to drop this stream down there. Hopefully, some of them guys will watch it. So I hope we actually never. I think it's better we never find out who it is. But like I said, it's being a stream. I like mysteries. It's something I just always kind of took a little bit of interest in. That's why I came across your YouTube channel. And yeah, I think we've covered most everything we could talk about without rambling on. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No, thanks for the invite. I think we share that affliction of being contrarian or being, interested in mysteries that, for whatever reason, we can't just accept things at face value, which can be a frustrating thing. But, I think you're missing out on so much if you go through life without questioning these things. So yeah, I enjoyed talking with you. We could have done another hour, but I probably got to head out as well. So yeah, thank you again for the invite.
For sure, man. Thanks for coming on. And thanks for everybody for tuning in. And I'll try to get a little more active on Twitter and YouTube in the coming months. Later, guys.